What is survival if there's no danger? Calling Lightyear Frontier a survival game feels like an oxymoron because you're not exactly surviving anything. Try to drown yourself and you'll just be transported back to the safety of shore. Throw yourself off a cliff and you won't take any fall damage. There's no concept of damage at all, actually. Despite this FPS perspective and a mouse wheel stacked with things that look and point like guns, your goals are peaceful, and it folds that non-combative style into a game that's as tranquil as it is strategic. Lightyear Frontier uses the rituals of tree-punchy, base-buildy survival games to power an experience that's part cozy farm sim, part adventure game. And it's a good one. A pretty good one, at least from what I've played. This is definitely an early access review for an early access game, and whether or not it's going to sound like a recommendation is going to depend on which of Lightyear's many genre labels you're here for. I'm somewhere between an enthusiastic yes for Lightyear as a strict farm sim, and an enthusiastic yes but wait for Lightyear as everything else it is. It may sound like a superfluous distinction, but one that I'm making because Lightyear Frontier serves more folks than just your co-op do creative stuff with your mates types. I'm about 8 hours into a solo experience that used farming as the means, not the ends, and it was more fun than you'd think for a few reasons. For starters, this frontier is authored. These beautiful horizons weren't made with procedural generation. This is a hand-curated world with discrete, named zones, each with their own non-combative fauna, flora, and materials to gather. They also house some secrets to find. Lightyear Frontier doesn't prioritize narrative, but it does give you just enough of it to provide the game some direction outside of just crafting stuff. Ruins imply there's more history to the planet than it lets on, and mysterious doors seem to respond well to all the cleaning you're doing.
What a curious object.
In Lightyear Frontier, you play as a space guy who has found themselves crash-landed, very luckily, on a planet rich in vegetation and poor in hazards. You quickly meet a satellite that acts as a literal North Star figure coaching you through the experience, and you'll slowly fall into the game's routine of cleaning up the planet, which helps you upgrade your mech and your crafting potential, which helps you clean up the planet. There's an almost power wash simulator-like feeling to that routine, with no-stakes predictable hosing and vacuuming happening between your farming. I'm not embarrassed to admit that it might actually be my favorite part of the game. I don't have whatever gene inspires people to make the kind of beautifully fenced and proportioned farmsteads like the ones you'll see in the screenshots. The little crafting hubs I built were, utilitarian, but I am a sucker for vibe, and Lightyear Frontier is a vibe delivery machine. The lack of stakes helps that. It's a simple, cozy little world you can explore at your own pace with no fear of what you'll run into, nor any stress as day turns to night. There's this consistent theme of cooperation with, rather than subjugation of, the environment. You'll frequently be feeding critters in hopes that they poop out whatever resource you need as thanks. The look of this thing is doing a lot of heavy lifting too. Climbing up near any cliff will reward you with an idyllic landscape rich in color and beautifully lit that invites you to come explore. It captures that magic of a simple pastoral life in its mechanics and its feel, and it threads this needle of being satisfying for its actual farming, but also satisfying for the idealized country life from centuries past. But this is not centuries past. We're presumably in some future where mechs are commonplace, and maybe one of the most inspired choices is that these aren't sleek anime mechs. What you're piloting is closer to industrial farm equipment, both in its look and its feel. There's a lot of inertia when piloting. You don't turn on a dime, and the cockpit actually takes more time to rotate than the legs, giving this illusion of weight. Sometimes the mech is a bit more trip-happy than feels appropriate, but otherwise it gives the game a feeling of physicality that transports you to this world. You can see that theme bubble up in other ways too, like how changing your mech's limbs isn't abstracted through menus, but instead something you perform magnetically by removing and applying new limbs with your tools. I like Lightyear Frontier, so why did I only play 8 hours? That's where the nature of early access and reviews and recommendations intersect in some weird ways. As a farm sim and platform for creative building, there's way more than 8 hours here, with a level of polish and production that goes beyond that early access labeling, and co-op extends that even further. But my problem is that I think I might enjoy it too much for early access. When played strictly as a game and not an infinigame, you can see the framework of something ready to be fleshed out, and the areas where it is incomplete are the ones that I personally think would suffer if months are put between them. If and when they make good on this roadmap stuff, major and minor content updates are going to be improving the gameplay and adding to the story. and the fact that there's even a story at all is part of why I'm here, and part of why I think I'll be closing then reopening this book at 1.0, rather than playing it piecemeal. On top of having a story that's still in progress, the biggest opportunities for Lightyear Frontier's early access sit with resource allocation and samey objectives, specifically for the story stuff. The crafting menus slowly onboard you by drip feeding you new crafting patterns whenever you first find their components out in the world. Sometimes that drip feed isn't drippy enough though. There were times when I had a pattern that demanded resources I hadn't found yet, which is supposed to spur you into exploration and finding that resource, but that exploration frequently feels aimless. There's not much direction in where you might find, say, copper. I don't suggest that the game is in need of objectives or map markers. I mean the landscape doesn't always communicate where that treasure is hiding. That initial search for copper probably would have been more rewarding if I knew at least the right province to start in, rather than navigating blindly and hoping I stumbled into it. That sort of craft whatever you find attitude just finds itself in contrast with major and obvious resource bottlenecks that exist in how the crafting is dished out to you, where sometimes lacking one particular item puts the entire crafting system on hold until you find it, which can be frustrating. I'm not entirely positive this is how it works because we're in the pre-release period, but I'm pretty sure the spawn rate of certain resources is inorganically tied to your first acquisition of it. Meaning the first time you find a certain ore, it may be hidden away in a singular cave, and then once you get it, it propagates itself out in the world a bit more. Again, that's a bit speculative on my part, but it certainly felt that way, and spending an hour trying to find something I desperately needed but had no idea where to look was a relative low point in Lightyear's otherwise simple crafting and cleaning challenges. The other low point is a recurring artifact acquisition objective. Ancient ruins scattered across the island house little secrets you can collect, and their collection is usually married to some of the more lore and story-based aspects of the frontier. From a gameplay perspective, they're tedious. You walk around and grab identical-looking purple spheres, and what makes this mindless busy work less fun than the rest of the game's mindless busy work is that it's not tied into your efficiency increasing and crafting ecosystem. The spheres you're collecting just go into a nebulous collection counter rather than being objects that fuel production, and the actual act of collecting itself doesn't satisfy those same digital pacifier urges as cutting down trees or sucking up weeds, because those latter ones get more powerful as you upgrade your mech, whereas the sphere collecting doesn't. It just feels a little divorced from the rest of the game, and that's a shame because taking part in this objective gives little clues about the history of this land. Lightyear Frontier sources inspirations from many different genres, and its level of completeness and polish is going to feel different depending on which of those genres you're here for. As a creative sandbox and co-op farm sim, it's incredibly enjoyable. It's got a comfortable no-stakes atmosphere, it's got a beautiful look, and constantly reinforces friendly themes of frontier exploration rather than frontier subjugation. But there's also an early version of a cozy, collection-driven adventure here, with progression and a story and twists. And the irony is that this base experience was both bumpy and promising enough to warrant putting the game down. There's an actual play it and complete it video game in here that I didn't want to rob myself of playing in 18 or so months. Therein lies the paradox of Lightyear Frontier and the paradox of early access. I think I recommend Lightyear Frontier, but I'm far more interested in the game it may become rather than the game it currently is. And my own personal tastes leave me in optimistic follow territory rather than wanting to eagerly play every update. It's a game that's already good, but when it's at the cusp of greatness, I'd rather wait. I just hope that greatness isn't light years away.